And welcome into another episode of Tiger Territory, part of the Foul Territory Network, a Detroit Tigers podcast. I'm Kieran Steckley. With me, as always, a man who right now is about to tell you who had the best batting practice in spring training to date. He is Cody Stavenhagen. Go.
Oh, wow. On the spot. I've actually spent a lot more time watching bullpens. But, it was like pretty good. I'm going Jace Young. Just a lot of natural, easy carry on his ball. I'm not going to say it's better than everyone's. Just watching him has stood out. Like, batting practice means nothing, but he's getting a lot of backspin, a lot of easy carry on the ball. Riley Green's looked pretty nasty, too, because he's Riley Green, and Cole Keith can hit the ball a long way. But Jace is the one that I've watched and kind of been like, hey, man, there's some power in there, new wrist and all.
Yeah, okay, so that's actually – I know what you were going to say. So I'm glad that you brought up Jace because he ties into a couple of things that I want to start out with. We'll get to Scott Harris kind of giving state of the Tigers here in a second. But Jace is a guy that we've talked about for a long time. It's like, give us something, team. Please give us something to, like, get us some idea of how you feel about Jace. We got a little bit of a quote this week. And we got to see him do some grounders. You put some videos on X at Cody Stavenhagen. But you got the BP stuff. We got a couple Oppo home runs in there. It's all well and good. But
we're not going to do it. We're not going to make too much of BP or bullpens.
We're not going to make too much of it. But the fact that you bring that up and the calculated way that you did, and I mean this sincerely, the fact that you brought it up in the serious way is an indicator of what this guy's calling card will have to be in order to make an impact this year, in order to make the team, in order to be a major leaguer eventually, right? Is that like this is a bat first guy. We talked about it on draft day. We watched him in college. If you watch college baseball, he's been a bat first guy since as long as I've known the name Jace Young, which is since he was 18 because he was a good player at Texas Tech right away. Like, he is a bat first guy. And if he is, making you say like, oh, look, it's natural in the box for him. That's a good reminder of what he is here for, essentially, if that makes sense. Not obviously making anything of it, but that is something that if you're projecting what this team needs, and we all agree the team needs offense as it has the entirety that we've been doing this podcast. If the team needs offense, there's a guy who's a first-round pick who's been a hit first guy his entire life. Kind of see what we have here. So I'm glad you brought up Jace.
It was interesting to hear Jace talk about his wrist and how different he has felt. He felt the difference pretty quickly within a couple weeks after surgery. He said he wasn't really dealing with like pain, but there's just kind of a constant pinching in his swings last September. We'll see how that translates, but at least to him, it's been a pretty big deal, it sounds like.
Yeah, and if we're being frank, and let's just say that he goes on to have some sort of nice offensive season, whatever your definition of nice is, we would probably look back, especially if there's some like real power in there, we'll probably look back at his first, month and a half, whatever, of being in the major leagues. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, you hear about the wrist, you see a difference, that makes sense. And he would get like a little bit of grace for not having that much output with the bat. Now, again, we talked about he is also, part of being a natural guy in the box is your feel for the strike zone. That's a Scott Harris thing, even though he wasn't drafted by Scott Harris, is that like he gets on base. That's a valuable component there as well. So as much as we love, and we'll talk about here in a second, some of the infielding drills and the getting the short hops and throwing it across the diamond, the bat is the thing to look for as like what could be his true impact. So if you believe in Jace, you felt a little bit better about the news that happened this past week. We've talked about it in a reactionary sense. Alex Bregman chose to go to the Boston Red Sox on a short-term, lucrative deal, but a short-term deal with more, coin a term, optionality. That's fine. It's hard to say he made a bad decision. I certainly don't think he made a bad decision. I think he made a really good decision, if not awkward, considering he's going to play second base. But since then, since we last talked, Cody, we heard from Scott Harris. And for the first time since he's been the head of a front office, Scott Harris had to, maybe the F word's a little bit too strong, but kind of go get ahead of a failure. Now, he had the trade with Los Angeles with Flaherty to where he didn't have to talk about like a failure with getting
Eduardo. He had to deal with
Eduardo, but that's something that's not completely in his control.
In a way, that was maybe, I think, a worse. The Eduardo thing, whether it's his fault or not, optically was not good for Scott Harris.
It was not. It was
the
not.
Bregman thing. They offered 6 years, and failure is too they failed to sign him, but it wasn't in the context that I feel
I guess maybe L though. Maybe like you have to take
he had to go talk about an L. He had to go talk about
an L that we all know. Like you could at least sell the Eduardo thing a little bit, where it's like we could always bring him back. Whereas there's no bringing back Alex Bregman. You see what I'm saying? So like this was, and also Eduardo in the trade market's different than the best infield free agent on the market, right? So anyway, Scott Harris talked to you guys in the media, Cody. What did you kind of make of the way that he presented the state of the Tigers? Especially, I mean, it's kind of cruel timing that he did this, immediately. I assume this was scheduled regardless of the Bregman decision. So, had it been a day before, had it been 2 days later, it might have been a little bit different, but the timing couldn't have been worse or more perfect, depending on your point of view. What did you kind of make of Scott Harris, his first comments here down in Lakeland?
Well, we've talked just a couple weeks ago about Scott Harris kind of, being a little more adamant with some of his comments, maybe having a little more swagger in front of the media, maybe just being a little more comfortable in the job overall, coming off a playoff appearance. And I really think that's what we saw. I wasn't sure what to expect from Scott. I was halfway prepared for I'm not going to comment on free agent negotiations. I think that's maybe what he would have said his first year. But Scott, he was pretty good. He was fairly transparent that the Tigers really wanted Alex Bregman and they made him a compelling offer and it didn't happen. His line for a while has been, we want players who want to be here. And then he kind of spun it forward to touting all the other good things the Tigers have going on. I mean, obviously there is some degree of spin there. You miss out on this player that maybe could have catapulted you to AL pennant conversation. And then you start talking about the farm system. But nothing Scott Harris said was wrong. He, talked about they can't be an organization that is dependent on signing a free agent. He pointed to their development and their farm and the other things they have going on and touted the guys they have internally. He went as far as to say, we beat a team with Alex Bregman in the playoffs, so clearly it can be done. So there was a little hint of defiance, of maybe just a little bit of spiciness from Scott. And even though they missed out on Bregman, I think it's good to have a president of baseball operations that's beginning to carry himself in a way that I think can inspire some confidence.
Sure, and I'm also a big believer that it's okay for people to grow on the job in general. You've grown on your job. We've grown doing this podcast. Rookies are obviously growing on the job. Managers grow on the job. It's okay for him to grow on the job and not present him something the same way he would 2-3 years ago or whatever. That's okay. That's okay. And so I'm glad. And also, look, if you got a postseason appearance on your belt, you won up the entirety of Major League Baseball with this Flaherty situation. It's okay to be, feeling yourself a little bit and be defiant and be like, fine, look, wanted you there.
Or why did you use the phrase "that's fine" so many times that it's clearly it's not fine.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Look, it's fine. It's okay.
We didn't want him anyway.
It's probably the length of the contract is probably the one thing that will latch on to that notion, because again, you're a guy like Jace, you got to be all right, ball up. Now it's my turn. You know what I mean? And things become maybe a little bit more clear. We're gonna do roster projections, Cody, on this episode. We haven't done one yet, but before we do that, I think we should because we're going to go a long time, and I don't know when we're going to have time to interrupt ourselves. I think we should go ahead and get a word from our sponsors here at Tiger Territory before we get into roster projections. So stay tuned.
Oh, Todd Father. Remember the good old days when we would have the cards in the binders, but then they'd get all messed up and we're trying to sell online and it's just real clunky? They really actually weren't the good old days, were they?
No, they were definitely not. But now there's a better way. The Arena Club has been dominant with this. You get to trade your cards, you could sell them. But the best part for me is getting them graded. I love everything about that. This new age of getting cards graded. You could display them on your online showroom, your mobile device. It's the coolest thing in the world.
Whether you're buying, selling, trading, or displaying, Arena Club is the all-in-one trading card platform. You have to sign up for an account at arenaclub.com/foul. Just like Todd Father mentioned, there's a process that combines AI and human grading to get the job done. Right now, 20% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/foul. Use code FOUL. That's arenaclub.com/foul. Code FOUL for 20% off your first.
All right. And I can tell you the card industry is still booming. I work in the industry, and there's a lot of good stuff out there. Arena Club is definitely one of the innovations of the market. So get in it while you can. So, all right. Let's go ahead and
it's kind of like Ha-Seong Lee stock. Ha-Seong Lee's not going to make our roster projection, but let's just say it right now because you want to know who the talk of spring training has been. It's been Ha-Seong Lee. Ha-Seong Lee, he'll probably start in AAA, but he had a 141 WRC plus in AA at age 21. Scott Harris has been bullish on this guy for a while. He started playing third base toward the tail end of last season, and just watching him and Jace Young take grounders at third, like Ha-Seong Lee looked pretty good at third base. He looked better than Jace at third base, and there's some hit tool there too. So we'll see how the year develops for Ha-Seong Lee, but yeah, he's kind of the darling of camp so far.
I always forget how young he is, man.
I know.
Like he literally, I mean, we're doing this February 16th. He literally just turned 22 like 2 weeks ago. His birthday's early February. So it's a guy that, you know, you want to talk about starting your stuff. Like if he becomes like some sort of everyday player, that's another feather in the cap for Scott Harris as well. So like I imagine he has quite the emotional attachment to Ha-Seong Lee. And that's a guy that he was, if you know, like if you really pay attention to some of the lower rungs and then the progressions of these minor leaguers and the people in the Tiger space, there's a lot of people that do a great job of that, have been hyping this guy up for a while. And now he's going to be at a little bit more of the forefront and quickly, I would say, will become one of the more more eyeballs, I would say, for Tigers players as you're looking like, you know, could this guy be something, you know, like sooner rather than later? So I'm excited to watch him. I haven't gotten obviously a lot of time to watch him at all. So I'm excited to see how he does. He does look like a natural on the infield. That's all I'll say.
It's funny though. He's built kind of like a fire hydrant. You don't think that he could move, but then he does. Like he's pretty agile. JJ Cooper in our last episode said a lot of people think he could be a plus defender at second base. Right now, if he keeps trending this way, he could be playing third base in the big leagues by the end of the season.
He's listed at 5'10", 190. I mean, we could probably say that he could be 200 pounds because who knows when that listing gets in there. That's on Baseball Reference. Mm-hmm. But he moves well. And that's one of the more impressive like aspects of his athleticism. So Ha-Seong Lee, as Cody put on X, buy your stock. All right. He is not in the mix, as you said, Cody, but there is some interesting discussions to be had here with the roster projection for the Tigers. The least interesting one is catcher, so we're going to get it out of the way real quick. Jake Rogers is there, and Dylan Dingler. They brought in Nito, but there hasn't been a lot of buzz with Nito. They want to emphasize young players. To me, Dingler feels like a lock. Speaking of athleticism, the athleticism aspect of his game is something that I want to see like out in full force. His numbers are better than you remember if you just kind of go with what he did in limited time last season. So we'll start off right here. We got the question on the screen. You can watch it if you're watching us on YouTube. Dingler a lock? You like Dingler there?
like a 90% lock, not official, but something would have to go really crazy in camp, or he'd have to get hurt to not break with the team on opening day. I think Dingler and Rogers will be your catchers. Tomas Nido and Brian Servin will be in AAA as depth if needed. There's a chance Dingler could struggle early in the season. I'm not ruling that out, but I think the Tigers want to give him every chance, and his defense might just be pretty good too, especially now that he has some major league experience under his belt.
I mean, do we feel like this is a guy? I mean, and again, I'm looking at his stats from last season. He only got 84 at bats, but there was 5 doubles and 2 triples in there. So, like, again, speaks to, some of the ability there. He's gonna get some run, right? There's not like a short leash here aspect to Dingler, right?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if he's hitting 120 in May, I mean, that has to be a conversation, but I don't, I think just like the majority of young players we've seen the Tigers develop over the past couple of years, I think they will give him plenty of runway, and it would probably have to be going pretty poorly for them to actually pull the plug. I think they want to see this guy handle himself and develop at the big league level.
And usage, you feel like it's...
that's going to be the interesting one. If you remember last spring, AJ Hinch almost kind of surprised us when he started talking about Jake and Carson Kelly as a true tandem. And usage was pretty even there, especially early in the season. I would expect it probably to be lean a little more toward Jake just because Dylan is so inexperienced, but some of that might depend on how Dylan is performing both at the plate and both defensively. I'm not sure we have the answer to that yet. If I had to guess right now, I could see it being more 60-40, 65-35 Jake Rogers.
I think that's fair too. All right, we'll go on to the infield. The news this week of Javier looking like he'll be healthy for opening day kind of lends itself to eliminating that aspect of the roster conversation. He's got 3 years left on his contract. It's not the veterans minimum. He's going to be here. He's going to be a part of your team. AJ had a quote about like sort of the intrinsic value of Javier, which I understand. We've seen multiple examples of how ball players love Javy Baez. I akin it to like Russell Westbrook. Like there's not an NBA player that doesn't love Russell Westbrook, even if you feel like the physical tools have diminished. This is an interesting time for Javier. Expectations are about as low as they've ever been, probably. And if he can be healthy, he's in a situation for the first time in a long time where if he kind of provides a couple moments, like he's going to be looked at more favorably than he has been. Obviously, Sweeney's going to be getting plenty of run as well. Colt Keith, your starting first baseman. Gleyber Torres, the still not talked about enough, in my opinion. Gleyber Torres is your second baseman, and then we have the third base conundrum. So your take, Cody, on the Javier Baez. How many are we going to get? A lot of Javy Baez moments, or what's the ratio there, and what do you kind of make of just like him as a part of this conversation?
Well, the good thing, if you set your expectations as low as humanly possible, you can't be disappointed. So I think that's what I'm kind of doing with Javier Baez, and I think that's kind of what the Tigers are probably doing too. Yeah, I think there is a 100% likelihood he's going to be on this roster, assuming he is healthy. He still has a couple steps to go in his recovery, but he's out there taking hacks and taking grounders. Unless there's some sort of setback, I think he's going to be just fine. Then the question becomes, how much will he play? And that's up for debate a little bit. I guess it'll largely depend on his performance. If I had to project it right now, I just don't think the Tigers are going to try to force Javy being an everyday guy again. If he gets some reps and starts playing like an everyday guy, then he'll be an everyday guy. But I think they're done. They're trying to win. I am keeping Trey Sweeney on my opening day roster. But I do think that's a little more of a conundrum than we've talked about. Just because if you tried to build a lineup against left-handed pitching, which the Tigers they'll see Blake Snell at some point in the opening series, it gets a little sticky. If you have Colt Keith, who's left-handed, if you have Parker Meadows, who's left-handed. If you have Sweeney, Young, and Zach McKinstry all on your bench, that's not good. You could be in a sticky situation there. So it's a little tough for me to put Trey Sweeney and Zach McKinstry on the same roster. I think Sweeney played well, has a lot to prove at the plate, but came up big in some pressure moments. I have to think the Tigers would like for him to be on this team. Now, there's a world where maybe it's best for him to get experience, develop every day, play in Toledo. But I think he has the edge and could be the shortstop against right-handed pitching. And we can go ahead and get into Zach McKinstry. I think a lot of this roster is going to revolve around that question. The Tigers paid Zach McKinstry $1.65 million this offseason, which would seem to indicate a level of commitment. He's out of options, and then it's kind of like, okay, let's say you demote Sweeney. You're really going to go with Javy Baez and Zach McKinstry as your shortstops? Tough to get excited about that. I'm not so sure McKinstry's guaranteed a spot. And here's why. I think they paid him for a reason. And it's because they could DFA him. And then he's out of options and he's making well more than the league minimum. So would another team claim him? You run a risk, but there's a pretty high likelihood the Tigers could DFA him and get him back. It's almost like building in an extra option. So if I had to project it right now, no offense to Zach McKinstry, guy works hard, guy's a fun player, I would leave him off of this roster. But I will just say that's going to be a big question. I think McKinstry and Sweeney both vying to be that left-handed guy who can play shortstop.
I go through a lot of Zach McKinstry aspects in my head, and I did all last year. Like I felt like there was a little bit. I felt like he was probably used. He was used more than I would have wanted to use him at the beginning of last season, and there was a time where it was like, is he an everyday player? That quickly dissipated. I like
a 900 OPS in August or whatever. So.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, I like versatility. I like the fact that, generally speaking, I like the fact that he's left-handed bat. On this team, it's not necessarily the biggest attribute on the planet, but just in general, I like the fact that he's a left-handed bat. And then, I when they signed him, I thought, or, paid him that money, I thought, I just feel like Zach McKinstry's a guy, we talked about this, Cody, before. It's like, I feel like it's a guy that you can kind of like outgrow, like the need to have him. And then I look at it as like, a lot of his like percentile stuff, he doesn't play enough to get. But like Baseball Savant has him like really good on launch angle sweet spot percentage, really good on square percentage. A lot, he doesn't have a lot of power. His hard hit, his barrels, like it's not remarkable. But like, he's got 81 percentile range in fielding, and his arm strength's above average, and his sprint speed is in the basically 80 percentile. And then I go to his Baseball Reference projections, and they almost project him to be an everyday player. They got him with 400 plate appearances, with like what you would consider Zach McKinstry numbers: 225 batting, 8 home runs, 4 triples, 17 doubles, 15 stolen bases. And so it's like, well, then again, don't good teams have Zach McKinstry's too? So I just go back and forth. But the big braining, the contract, I like that thought process there, Cody. That I think you're onto something.
Maybe so. And the Tigers did something very similar with Andy Ibanez. I'm not sure that is by accident. But we can go on to third base. The opening day third baseman, I 100% guarantee you, will depend on who's pitching. Because if it's a right-handed pitcher, it could be Zach McKinstry. It could be Jace Young. And I think Jace Young is probably the biggest question here. We don't know. We already talked about Jace a little bit. The bat is going to have to be good enough to make up for the defense. He can improve defensively, but dude's got a long way to go. Even just watch him the other day, like there's always the question, does he have a strong enough arm? The Tigers seem to believe he has the arm strength, but that the arm strength looks bad because the footwork is bad. You watch Jason, he kind of takes 2 shuffles and a crow hop, and it's almost like he's running the ball over to first when he throws it. So that's not what you want, not good timing for third base. Makes me wonder, is he doing that because he feels like he has to get enough mustard on the throw, or is it just bad technique? Either way, that's one of his faults right now on defense. But I think the Tigers would like Jace Young to make this team. I don't think he's guaranteed. I think he will have to perform in spring training, make defensive strides, and hit a little bit. But I think in an ideal world, he's on your roster. And then if the Tigers were to face a left-hander on opening day, you're staring at the question, is Matt Vierling playing third base or is he in right field? I tend to think he's going to be in right field, and one Andy Ibanez, noted lefty killer, would play third base. The alternate construction is probably Vierling at third and Winsel Perez in the outfield, or maybe even Justin Henry Malloy's in a corner. We can, there are going to be a million scenarios here because it's the Tigers. But that's kind of my basic outline of third base for right now.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, it feels better to write down Young on your roster because of the hitting upside than to leave him off. So, I hope he makes the team and is able to show his ability. Because again, first round pick, not nothing. Outfield, pretty simple. You put the Vierling piece in there. Vierling's obviously a part of that puzzle. Riley Green, Parker Meadows, Kerry Carpenter. His usage will be interesting to me throughout the year. He's a guy who I just probably should we give up the dream of him hitting lefties? Like, not even, I don't mean like hitting lefties. I mean like getting like actual opportunities to hit lefties, because with the way everything else is on here, there's a world where you feel like that's a waste to put him up against lefties.
Just when I gave up on that dream, I think AJ Hinch started to draw me back in a little bit. And maybe it's spring training, just like, oh, you never know. But Kerry was kind of adamant. He was like, yeah, I haven't sat down with AJ yet, but when I do, I want to talk about that. And, it's Kerry in a very respectful way, but he was like, I want to see what I can do to get more opportunities because I believe he can do it. And he mentioned his minor league track record, which I hadn't looked at in a long time. He's right. He had a 900 OPS against lefties his last year at the minor leagues. And he's like, a lot of those guys are now throwing in the big leagues that I was facing then. And so he's kind of got a point there. I don't think he's going to be like starting against lefties. I don't think he's going to be getting a ton of ABs against lefties. But one point AJ made, are people going to start managing differently against the Tigers? A, knowing AJ has Andy Ibanez lurking on the bench. B, knowing Kerry Carpenter in a way is the biggest target in your lineup against a right-handed pitcher. He's in the same class as Aaron Judge in terms of OPS. So if you can insert a lefty and attempt to chase Kerry from a game, would there be more times where AJ will leave Kerry in if it's the 5th, the 6th? Sacrifice maybe a bad matchup, but that could help some of the right-handed hitters in the order, and then you get 7, 8, 9. Kerry's still in that game, still looming as a threat. I think we could see the strategy play out there a little differently. So it's going to be an ongoing topic. I don't think Kerry's suddenly going to become a true everyday player, but they're leaving the door open for maybe, a somewhat increase in left-handed at-bats. I
like the idea of that. We'll see if it actually, kind of plays out in that fashion. Jahan and Wenzel. You mentioned Wenzel, mentioned Jahan. Those are two names that it gets a little crunchy. It gets a little crunchy with what you want to do. I think we both would agree that they're going to make impacts on this team during the season, but in terms of like breaking from Lakeland, Perez is a guy that a lot of people like the upside with, and then our last taste of watching Jahan was him raking in the playoffs. And if we're gonna be a little squeamish against lefties, I kind of want Jahan in that conversation.
I think Jahan has inserted himself very much into this picture with what he did at the tail end of last season. And I think there's a world where Jahan and Spencer Torkelson are very much competing for a similar roster spot. Torque, obviously the big question here. And even, from the time they signed Gleyber Torres, I think most people were kind of like, Torque's most likely starting in Toledo. I'm just saying, I don't know. From some conversations I've had this past week, it seems like the Tigers think there's a real path to him being on this roster. Maybe that's just a little bit of lip service because it's spring training, but even, some off the record type stuff, like it's enough to make you wonder, what if Torque is basically your DH every day against left-handed pitching? And against righties, he looms on the bench, and he's the guy who comes in for maybe Kerry Carpenter. Is that enough at bats to justify carrying him? And stated that simply, yeah. But I think it gets hairy when you start. You got to get a guy a day off his feet. You got, maybe there's an injury here that changes the complexion of the roster. I just still have a hard time seeing the Tigers carrying a first base DH only type. I mean, I guess they did it for years with Miguel Cabrera, and it kind of hurt the roster. Look at how AJ managed last year and what he could do because he didn't have a Miguel Cabrera type taking up one of those bench spots. Torkelson, maybe he could be more productive than Miguel, but he's going to have to really break to get that spot. I think he's up against Jahan, and Jahan has the advantage. He can play outfield, even if it's not pretty, he can do it. So that right now I would take Jahan over Torque, and my roster has Trey Sweeney, leaves off Zach McKinstry. It has Justin Henry, Malloy, and Jace Young. It leaves off Winsel Perez, which I don't feel good about. I'm looking at this and I'm like, no, I want Winsel on this team. Switch hitter, pretty good outfielder. But I just don't know who to take off. Like Jace, I think really would be the guy. If Jace doesn't make the team, Vierling is going to play a lot more third. And then you really kind of need that outfielder in Winsel. So right now I'm leaving Winsel off, but there are several different ways this team can be constructed. It's going to be kind of interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I value what Perez brings to the team, but I value what Jahan could do. And if Torque really is somebody that they feel like has a real role there, it's going to be hard for me to even side against that, even if I don't necessarily see it, even if I think it's a little bit more limited. Like there's,
yeah.
I wouldn't blame him for not giving up on Torque's bat potential. Like that's just how sports works. So, Badu, Madris, those guys obviously, barring something crazy, not gonna be on the roster at least to start the year, but still part of organizational depth. All right, starting pitching, think 1 through 4 feels pretty simple. Mm-hmm. Skubal, Flaherty, Olsen, Joe. We probably would have penciled in Joe the entire time, but the Alex Cobb news kind of makes it there. Number five. I'm reading the tea leaves, Cody. I feel you and your media brethren and the way that the Tigers on socials are kind of sharing things. I'm reading the tea leaves. I think there's some Maeda hype happening. I have Maeda as my 5th starter right now. And contract-wise is part of it too. But I just feel like that's the easier thing to do. And I think that's the play to begin the year is like, see.
Yeah, I agree. I've kind of felt this way all off season, and especially with Alex Cobb hurt, man, it just makes a lot of sense. There's still a world in which Kenta Maeda could be an okay pitcher. I mean, I know last year was really bad, but he has looked more built up, throwing harder entering spring, all that good stuff. I asked Scott Harris, do you expect Kenta Maeda to start the year in the rotation? Thinking there was an off chance he might be like, yes, we expect Kenta to be a starter. He didn't do that. He said, he basically said that'd be cool if Kenta shows up and he's good, but we like that he now has more flexibility. He could pitch out of the bullpen too. So this is very much an open question. It's important to Kenta to be a starter. He's going to be battling with a long list of guys. Casey Mize, Brant Herter, probably the 2 next most likely picks. And I said on our last episode, like, man, I still can't quit Casey Mize. He's working on some different sliders. Like, if the fastball's a little better, he wants to get back to throwing the split more, which kind of made me happy to hear if he can actually throw it the way he wants to. So it's hard to quit Casey Mize, but I'm going Kenta because he's getting paid. And Job, again, I think that seems clearer with Cobb injured. But the Tigers are going to have to be all in or all out. I made a case not that long ago for, like, what if you did just keep Job down to get the extra year team control? There's a little bit of a caveat I didn't fully consider at the time, which, let's say Jackson Job doesn't debut until May 5th or whatever. Tigers would gain an extra year of team control. What if he goes out and then dominates and he wins? If he finishes in the top 2 of Rookie of the Year, he would be awarded a full year of service time. This happened with Paul Skeens and the Pirates last year. So basically, if you're going to keep him down, you should probably keep him down until like June or July. Otherwise, you're best off having this guy in the rotation, seeing if you can get an extra draft pick. I think it has to be one or the other. And if I had to choose one, I would choose Jackson Job in my rotation.
I would too. And then I've said this before, when it comes to Job, at a certain point, I want that arm firing major league innings.
That too.
You know, and it would be also hard. I understand the team aspect of it, but it'd be really hard to justify, I think, after a playoff appearance, keeping them down, like to the nth degree of what you just said, like keeping them down until like post fireworks on 4th of July. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that would.
And one thing, if he is on the big league roster, they're going to have to monitor his innings a little bit. So when people ask, like, is pitching chaos still going to be a thing? I think we would get into May, June, and see the Tigers build in bullpen days to get Job an extra day of rest.
Well, speaking of said bullpen, so this one I didn't have too much to think about. In fact, you could argue their offseason kind of made this relatively easy.
I question if they needed John Brebbia, because now he makes this projection a lot less fun.
Well, there you go. So I got Brebbia, obviously. I got Kane Lee, obviously. I have Holton, Brisky, Foley, Vest, Guter, and Herder as my bullpen. Does that match up? Or
that's exactly what I have. Foley, Vest, Brisky, Holton, Kane Lee, and Brebbia are basically locks. That leaves you with Sean Gunther, who was really good, throws a nasty slider, nasty sinker. I think they're going to like him left-handed, and Brant Herder, who, look at how his stuff grades out, man. And the Tigers love him, another left-hander. You would be carrying 3 lefties in that situation, which the Tigers have done before. Holton, basically, he gets everybody out, so he can count as whatever you want him to. The other candidate would be Brennan Hanafy, right-handed sinker guy. Ty Madden. Really, no one's kind of talking about Ty Madden. Cater Montero, who I really kind of like. But I think it would make more sense for Madden and Montero to maybe get those reps in Toledo. Casey Mize and Matt Manning, the dream of making at least one of those guys like a nasty reliever, lives on in my head. But again, especially with the signing of John Brebbia, I have a hard time. You would have to take out Gunther or Herder. So we're going to see what happens. There will eventually be injuries. We're going to see all of these guys. But right now, I've basically built a Toledo rotation just from the guys I'm leaving off. Mize, Manning, Madden, Montero.
It's a fun rotation, not just like, oh yeah, of course, guys that
can play in the big leagues. Yeah, literally,
like it's
it'd be better than the Chicago White Sox rotation. I promise you.
I mean, yeah, it's a fun rotation. We haven't gotten there yet, Cody, but I look forward to the Matt Manning outing where it's like, here we go. What do we make of this? Happen. It's gonna happen. Might happen 3 times this spring. All right, well. That was a lot of fun. There's some crunching to do, like I said, and we'll maybe get some more clarity here pretty soon. But as we're on the eve of like full on spring training starting, wanted to get that out there for everybody to see what you think. If you disagree or agree with us, you can hit us up on the socials. He is at Cody Stavenhagen. I am at Kieran_Steckley. Pod page is at Tiger Territory _ and you can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us on YouTube. Subscribe there, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I want to thank you, everybody, for making us part of your day. So for Cody Stavenhagen, I'm Kieran Steckley. Everybody have a great day.